Welcome. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on something, well, truly fundamental to who we all are. Imagine you're in a classroom, okay? Maybe you see a child really focused, diligently coloring, just trying to earn that coveted gold star for neatness.
Hmm.
Or maybe there's a new student, a little bit shy, sort of hanging back by the door, trying to figure out how to join a game out on the playground.
Yeah, you see that all the time.
Right. On the surface, these are just everyday moments, aren't they? Seemingly simple behaviors, but what's really driving them? What are those hidden psychological forces that make us strive or connect or sometimes even pull back?
That's exactly the puzzle we're here to explore today. We're going to dive beyond those surface observations to explore a really fascinating concept: identity motives.
Identity motives. Okay.
Think of these as the sort of invisible architects of our sense of self, these fundamental psychological forces that guide how people, how they build, maintain, and sometimes even fiercely defend who they believe themselves to be.
Wow.
It's a really powerful lens, especially for you, our listener, given your background in elementary education. You're already a keen observer of human behavior, right?
Yeah.
Especially those crucial formative years. And this deep dive is really tailored to connect directly with that experience.
Absolutely. And for this particular deep dive, we're drawing from an incredibly rich scholarly source. It's an excerpt from the Handbook of Identity Theory and Research, and we're specifically focusing on the chapter Identity Motives by Vivian L. Vigneault. So our mission today is to take this, rigorous academic work and sort of distill it into those aha moments that are immediately relevant, practically insightful, and frankly, just plain fascinating.
Exactly. And we understand you're already pretty adept at understanding children and developmental psychology. So our goal isn't just to present facts, but really to unearth those surprising nuggets that might make you look at a child's actions or maybe even your own in a completely new light. We'll definitely be sprinkling in plenty of examples, directly from the classroom setting, helping you connect these powerful concepts to the daily lives of your students and perhaps even unlock some new ways to support their growth.
So let's unpack this then. Before we even get to these powerful motives, we need to get crystal clear on what identity truly means in this context. I mean, it's not just your name or what you look like in the mirror, is it? It feels much, much broader than that.
It is significantly broader. Vigneault offers a wonderfully comprehensive definition. She defines identity as all aspects of the image of oneself, as represented in cognition, emotion, and discourse.
Okay, cognition, emotion, discourse. Break that down a bit.
Right. So in plain language, identity is basically the entire story you tell yourself about who you are. It's your internal narrative, how you feel about yourself and how you communicate that self to the world, and also how others see you and talk about you. It's your whole self-image, really, in all its complexity. And just to put that in a bit of historical context, think about the pioneering American psychologist William James. Way back in 1892, he talked about a man's me. And he went far beyond just the physical body.
Right.
His concept of me extended to basically everything an individual could call their own. Not just their physical self, but their clothes, their house, their family, friends, reputation, their work. Even the material possessions like, lands, horses, yachts, bank accounts in his day. It really encompasses everything that gives you a sense of belonging or ownership in the world.
Wow, that's a truly expansive me, isn't it? So if we apply that to a child in the classroom, their me isn't just their little body sitting in the chair.
No, absolutely not.
It's also maybe their favorite worn-out stuffed animal they bring for nap time, or their family unit they draw pictures of, their favorite sports team T-shirt, or even that very specific role they have in the classroom, like the class helper or the line leader, maybe even the best crayon sharpener.
Exactly. It's incredible how deeply kids, and let's be honest, all of us, can identify with these external things, these roles, these relationships. They aren't just accessories. They really become part of who we feel we are.
Totally.
And here's where it gets really interesting and maybe a bit counterintuitive for some. Our source material strongly emphasizes that identity isn't some fixed objective truth that you just sort of stumble upon one day. Like finding a hidden treasure map to your true self.
Right, not like you just discover it.
No.
Yeah.
Instead, it's something you actively build and rebuild throughout your entire life. It's an idea, or maybe more accurately, a set of ideas about yourself that are constantly being constructed and reconstructed.
Oh, okay.
And this happens through this complex, dynamic interplay of how we think about ourselves. It's the cognitive part, how we feel about ourselves, the affective part, and how we talk about ourselves, and how others talk about us, the communication or discourse part. And all of this, crucially, unfolds within the specific cultural and historical context we live in.
So it's not like you wake up one morning and poof, your identity is suddenly done, set in stone. It's much more like maybe a perpetual construction project with ongoing renovations and additions.
That's a great metaphor.
I'm just thinking how liberating that idea could be for children. Knowing they're not just stuck with who they are at 7 or 8 years old, there's room to grow and change.
That's a really powerful realization, yes. And a crucial implication of this constructionist view is that aspects of identity are not fixed or predetermined. There's always potential for change, for growth, for new definitions of self. It means that while the specific content of our identities, the actual building materials, if you will, comes largely from our social environment, the process is dynamic and ongoing. It's not a static mold.
But hang on, this isn't saying that identity is completely arbitrary, is it? Like, it's not a total blank slate where you can just fill in anything chosen completely at random. Because I can see someone listening thinking, well, if it's all constructed, then does anything really matter? Can I just decide I'm, I don't know, a dinosaur today?
Right. That's an excellent point to clarify, and it addresses a common worry about constructionist views. Sometimes critics worry it implies a complete blank slate from birth, suggesting identity is mostly arbitrary or accidental. And okay, in a purely cognitive sense, yes, no one is born with a fully preformed self-concept, like a list of personality traits.
Okay.
However, we are born with significant building blocks for constructing identity. These definitely include our genetic predispositions, our biological makeup, but also a huge amount of social and cultural resources provided right from the start by our parents, family, friends, and the wider society.
Okay. So resources. What kind of resources?
Well, think about it. The social processes of constructing an identity begin long before a child is even born. Parents might choose a name, they imagine what the child will be like. They draw on all these culturally available ideas about gender, family roles, class, ethnicity, nationality. From the very first lullaby, we're steeped in a world that gives us a starting palette, a set of materials to work with.
Okay. I like that. So it's not a blank slate, but maybe more like you're given a particular set of chalks to draw with.
Yes.
And those chalks, the colors and textures, they're very far from random. They're given to you by your environment, your family, your culture. You still have agency in what picture you create, but your initial tools are kind of pre-selected.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
You are the artist, but the art supplies are inherited in a way. And here's the really critical part. Despite being constructed or conceptual, identities are far from trivial or unimportant. They are profoundly meaningful.
Right.
The source emphasizes that people go to really extreme lengths, often taking highly concrete and consequential actions to maintain and defend the identities they've constructed. It even notes instances where people risk or sacrifice their own lives, or tragically take the lives of others to defend particular aspects of their identities.
Wow.
So while the identities themselves might be these conceptual ideas, the processes of constructing them and their consequences are absolutely real and deeply, deeply impactful.
That's such a powerful point. And for you, our listener, thinking about this in a classroom setting, it really resonates, doesn't it? Think about how children might fiercely defend their identity as the smart kid or the artist, the funny one, the leader of the group. These roles, even though they're constructed through countless little interactions and experiences, they drive very real behaviors, real efforts, sometimes even real conflicts in the classroom. They aren't just labels the kids wear, they are profoundly meaningful and motivating to the child. It helps us understand why a child might have a meltdown when their smart kid identity is challenged by a difficult math problem, or why a new student might seem a bit lost about a clear role to step into yet.
Exactly. Gives us a deeper layer of understanding. #tag them2. What are identity motives? Unpacking the why behind identity construction. So, given that people are constantly striving, maybe unconsciously, to construct what feels like a satisfactory sense of identity, a core question pops up. What exactly makes an identity satisfactory? Is it purely subjective, different for everyone, or are there maybe some universal principles at play that guide this whole construction process?
Right. So if we've established that identity isn't this fixed destination, but a really dynamic, lifelong journey of creation, the next logical question becomes, what are the internal compasses? What are the hidden forces guiding this incredible journey? What drives us to build our me in certain ways and not others? What exactly are these identity motives that push us towards that satisfactory sense of self?
Okay, so Vignoles defines identity motives as tendencies towards certain identity states and away from others, which guide the process of identity definition and enactment.
Okay, tendencies towards certain states.
Yeah, in essence, they're these underlying drives or cravings that push us to build our identities in specific ways, ways that generally make us feel good, whole, and functional in our world. You can think of them as the fundamental human cravings that our sense of identity needs to satisfy.
Like psychological hunger.
Exactly like that, in some ways. And here's a crucial insight from the source. They function quite similarly to basic physiological needs, like hunger or thirst, in three key ways. First, satisfying these motives generally leads to positive psychological well-being. You feel good, content, like you're thriving. Conversely, frustrating them leads to negative outcomes like distress, anxiety, maybe feeling low. Second, people inherently desire and strive for identities that satisfy these motives, and they actively try to avoid identities that frustrate them. It's like an innate pull.
Okay.
And third, when these motives are frustrated, even just temporarily, it typically leads to intensified strivings to satisfy them. Just like you'd search harder for food, the hungrier you get, you'll work harder, maybe unconsciously, to satisfy an unmet identity motive.
So, if a child isn't feeling a certain way about their identity, maybe they feel invisible in the classroom or not competent enough, they're going to try even harder, perhaps without even realizing it, to achieve that state they're missing. That makes so much sense.
It does.
But unlike hunger, which is clearly biological, are these motives something we're just born with, hardwired into our biology?
That's a great question and a really important distinction. The source notes that unlike purely physiological needs, identity motives aren't necessarily biologically hardwired in the same direct way. They could equally have originated as cultural adaptations to pervasive human concerns about social organization and the meaning of existence.
Ah, cultural adaptations.
Yeah, it highlights how deeply intertwined our psychological drives are with our social and cultural environments. They've likely evolved or been culturally selected because they serve a vital purpose in helping us navigate the incredibly complex human social world.
Okay, this raises another important question then. How do these identity motives differ from more general basic human needs that other psychological theories talk about? Things like the need for survival or avoiding uncertainty or even just the general need to belong. It sounds like there might be some overlap there.
There is definitely overlap, and it's a crucial distinction to make. Basic needs, like the need for survival or maybe reducing uncertainty, they influence many psychological functions. Identity is just one of many areas where these basic needs play out.
Right.
Identity motives, however, specifically entail that identity dynamics have a direct causal role in motivating behavior. Here's the key difference. Basic needs tend to push for certain ways of acting, like seeking safety, which may then have some knock-on effect on your identity.
Okay.
Identity motives, on the other hand, push for certain ways of seeing oneself, for instance, seeing oneself as competent or as connected to others, which then necessitate engaging in certain actions to maintain that specific self-perception.
Ah, okay, so the starting point is different. One starts with action, the other with self-perception.
Exactly. But they are, of course, complementary. In fact, it's likely that each of the identity motives we'll discuss came into being precisely because it serves some adaptive function in satisfying one or more of those basic needs. For example, having positive self-esteem might be beneficial in suppressing fears about mortality, or having a distinctive and meaningful sense of identity might be especially important for reducing feelings of uncertainty. So they work together, but the focus of identity motives is squarely on the self.
What's truly fascinating here, and maybe a little bit unsettling, is that we might not even be consciously aware of these powerful forces driving our behavior. If I'm striving for self-esteem, I'm probably not thinking, aha, I must satisfy my self-esteem motive right now. I'm just, trying to feel good about myself or trying to feel competent at something. So why are we so often in the dark about these profound drivers?
Yeah, it is fascinating. There are several really compelling reasons for this lack of awareness. Firstly, many of the strategies we use to maintain our identity involve biased thinking or even forms of self-deception.
Self-deception, like lying to ourselves.
In a way, yes, but often quite subtly. Think about attributing an exam failure to bad luck rather than, say, not preparing enough. That protects your self-esteem, your view of yourself as competent. But that strategy only really works if you're unaware of the underlying motive, right? If you consciously knew you were just making an excuse to feel better, it wouldn't actually make you feel better. Our brains are quite clever at keeping us unaware of our own psychological maneuvers.
That is clever. It's like our brains have their own internal PR department, constantly spinning our experiences to make us look good, even just to ourselves.
That's a great way to put it. Secondly, even without active self-deception, people might be unaware because these motives operate at a much higher level of abstraction than our everyday concrete goals.
Higher abstraction, meaning,
Meaning, your underlying motive to feel competent, for instance, might manifest itself in very specific goals, like wanting to publish a paper, or wanting to improve your teaching ratings, or wanting to throw a really fantastic birthday party for your child. You're likely to focus on the specific, concrete goals, not the abstract, generic motive of competence that underlies all of them. It's like we see the individual trees, but not the forest of motivation.
okay, got it.
And thirdly, when these motives are routinely satisfied, they tend to function below radar. They generally only bubble up into conscious awareness when they are frustrated. That's when we start to feel a lack, a need, a kind of psychological ache.
Ah, right. It's like we don't really notice our need for air until we can't breathe, or we don't think about gravity until we trip over something.
Exactly. So because of all this, the self-deception, the abstraction, the below-radar functioning, asking people directly about their motives using self-reports is often unreliable. Instead, researchers have to infer these motives from their predictable effects on our behavior, our thoughts, and our well-being.
That makes perfect sense. So if we're often not aware of them, how do researchers actually detect and study these hidden motives? What's the evidence?
Right. Researchers infer the presence of these motives by looking for those predictable effects, those characteristic functions we talked about. A first line of evidence comes from studies linking motive satisfaction directly to subjective well-being.
Okay.
For example, study after study consistently shows that people with higher self-esteem tend to report greater life satisfaction and more positive emotions. And this even holds true within individuals over time. On days when someone's self-esteem happens to be higher, their overall mood and well-being are typically higher too.
So translating that to the classroom, a child who feels a strong sense of efficacy or competence in something, maybe reading, for instance, because they're consistently succeeding and seeing their own improvement, that child is generally going to be happier, more engaged in their learning. Their well-being literally reflects the satisfaction of that efficacy motive. It's not just about them doing well academically, but about them feeling good psychologically because they perceive themselves as doing well.
Exactly. A second line of evidence involves documenting these directional biases in how people process information about themselves. We talked about self-deception.
Right, the internal PR department?
Yeah. People often selectively attribute their successes to internal factors like their own intelligence or effort. I'm so smart, or I worked really hard on that. But they attribute their failures to external factors. The teacher made the test too hard, or my pen ran out of ink. That's the classic self-serving bias. Another example is the better than average effect, where a surprising majority of people rate themselves as better than average on all sorts of positive qualities, which of course is statistically impossible if everyone's doing it. The self system has even been humorously likened by one researcher, Greenwald, to a totalitarian political regime, constantly fabricating and revising personal history to maintain a positive image. Or maybe more benignly, we just tend to highlight the self-defining parts of our identities that satisfy our motives and gently push the parts that might frustrate them into the margins of our awareness.
Oh, I see that in the classroom constantly. A student gets an A on a project and beams, I'm so good at this subject. That's a clear internal attribution boosting that self-enhancement.
Yep.
But if they get a lower grade, it's almost instantly, oh, the instructions weren't clear, or my group members didn't do their part. That's the external attribution, protecting their sense of competence. It's almost like a child's natural psychological defense mechanism.
It really is. And the third line of evidence comes from studies looking at the effects of threatening or affirming different aspects of the self-concept. When aspects of our identity, either individual or group identity, are threatened, it can trigger a whole range of responses. Changes in those attributions we just talked about, increased prejudice against other groups, sometimes even aggression.
Okay.
However, many of these negative outcomes can actually be avoided or lessened if people are given the opportunity to cope with the threat by affirming or enhancing other aspects of their self-image. It's like having a psychological pressure release valve.
Interesting. So if a child's identity as, say, a good athlete is suddenly threatened, maybe they lost a really important game or they didn't make the school team they tried out for, they might cope by suddenly emphasizing how kind they are to their friends or how well they're doing in their math class. Instead, they sort of shift their focus, maybe unconsciously, to other areas where their identity motives are still being met. It's a way of saying, okay, I might not be great at this right now, but look, I'm still valuable and good at that.
That's exactly the kind of compensatory mechanism these studies reveal. It shows how interconnected these different parts of our identity are in maintaining overall well-being. Okay, so now that we've got a good handle on what identity is this ongoing construction and what identity motives are these underlying drives, let's really dive deep into the 6 core, potentially universal identity motives that Vignoles proposes in this work.
Okay, the big 6. Let's hear them.
They are self-esteem, continuity, distinctiveness, meaning, efficacy, and belonging. Now, while these specific motives are predicted to be universal, meaning pretty much every human across cultures seeks to satisfy them in some way, it's absolutely crucial to remember that different cultures might develop very different ways of satisfying them. This leads to all the diverse ways identity actually gets expressed around the world.
Right. The what might be universal, but the how is culturally shaped. Got it. Okay, first up, a motive we probably hear about the most. Self-esteem, it's such a buzzword, isn't it? What does this deep dive tell us about it that maybe goes beyond the usual surface level talk? What's the unique nugget here?
Yeah, it definitely is a buzzword. The self-esteem motive is fundamentally defined as the motivation to see themselves in a positive light. It's incredibly central to almost all psychological theories of this self and motivation, and it underpins a huge range of empirical findings. We see people showing a wide array of cognitive biases just to maintain and enhance their self-esteem, and these biases often intensify when self-esteem is under threat. We also inherently desire future identities that promise greater self-esteem, and naturally we fear those that promise less. We also tend to perceive as especially self-defining those aspects of our current identities that already provide us with a good dose of self-esteem. And importantly, over the long term, a person's level of self-esteem actually has a causal influence on their psychological well-being and their overall psychosocial adaptation. It's not just a fleeting feeling. It really shapes our life outcomes.
Okay, so it's powerful. The source also mentions different self-evaluation processes within self-esteem. This sounds like it gets more nuanced than just feeling good about yourself. Can you elaborate on those? I think there were 4.
Yes, exactly. The research points to potentially 4 distinct processes that influence how we evaluate ourselves. First, there's self-enhancement. This is probably the most dominant one, and it's all about aiming for positive current self-views. This is our feel-good now button.
Okay.
Second, there's self-assessment. This is different. It aims for accurate self-views, whether they're positive or negative. It's often seen as maybe a first stage if you're genuinely looking to improve yourself later on. This is the know the truth, good or bad button.
Right, like facing reality.
Kind of. Third, there's self-improvement, which aims for growth or achieving positive future self-views. This can be an indirect route back to self-enhancement. You can boost your present self-esteem simply by believing you'll get better in the future, even if you don't actually take the steps. This is the I'll be better tomorrow button.
Okay, I see the subtle differences.
But here's where it gets particularly interesting and maybe challenging. The 4th process is self-verification. This is the aim for stable or consistent self-views. This is the stay consistently me button.
Consistent. Even if me isn't great.
Exactly. This motive can actually lead people with low self-esteem to actively seek out negative feedback.
Yeah.
Because getting that negative feedback confirms their existing negative self-views. It provides a sense of predictability and coherence, even if it means sacrificing potential gains in self-esteem. It's a really strange psychological trade-off.
Wow, that is strange. Trading feeling good for feeling known.
Pretty much. Feeling consistent. Now, for most people, this self-verification motive usually leads them to verify moderately positive self-views, ensuring stability rather than seeking out negativity or radically positive feedback that feels inconsistent. But the potential conflict, especially for those with low self-esteem, is fascinating.
So it's not just about feeling good, but sometimes about feeling consistently me, even if me has flaws. That's a deep insight. And what about the difference between personal versus collective self-esteem? Is it about my individual worth or the worth of our group?
That's another key distinction, yes. Personal self-esteem refers to your own self-worth as an individual. Collective self-esteem is about the perceived worth of the groups you belong to, like your school, your family, your sports team, your nation.
Okay.
Interestingly, and perhaps counterintuitively, research highlighted in the source has found that personal self-esteem is often a stronger predictor than collective self-esteem of bias against other groups.
Really? Stronger than group pride?
Yeah. It suggests that threats to an individual's personal sense of self-worth can actually lead to increased discrimination against members of other groups, perhaps as a way to defensively boost that threatened personal self-esteem.
So it's less about my team is the best, and more like, I need to feel good about myself, and putting your team down helps me do that right now. That's a subtle but really significant difference. It's really about protecting your individual value, maybe by devaluing others.
Exactly. It seems to be a common dynamic influencing both personal and social identity processes. And while this motive for self-esteem is seen as universally adaptive, helping people avoid anxiety, persevere through difficulties, how positive self-regard is sought and achieved can differ significantly across cultures.
All right, you mentioned the how varies.
Yes. Non-Western cultures, particularly more collectivist ones, may use different strategies and emphasize different values to achieve positive self-regard. For instance, members might derive self-worth through demonstrating modesty, or by diligently doing their duty, or by fulfilling their expected social roles. These routes might seem almost counterintuitive from a Western individualistic perspective that often prizes standing out in individual achievement.
So it's not that they don't want self-esteem, but their pathway to it is different, reflecting what their culture values most. The source mentions a study by Vignoles and colleagues that found self-esteem was derived more from things like autonomy and individual achievement in more individualistic nations, but it was derived more from fulfilling one's duty and meeting social obligations in more collectivist ones.
That's right.
This is profoundly relevant for teachers, isn't it?
Absolutely critical. Think about how praise is given in a classroom. In a typical individualistic context, the teacher might say, "Wow, you're so smart, you figured that out all by yourself." This directly supports that self-enhancement route through individual accomplishment.
Yeah, we do that a lot.
But in a more collectivist-influenced context, perhaps with students from certain cultural backgrounds, praise like, "You worked so incredibly well with your group to solve that problem," or "Your cooperation really helped everyone succeed," might be far more effective in fostering their sense of positive self-regard. Why? Because it aligns with a more collective or conjoint sense of agency, where the self is seen and valued through its connections and contributions to the group.
Right.
Understanding these culturally sensitive ways of giving feedback can dramatically impact a child's motivation and their sense of worth. It helps our praise truly land where it matters most for that individual child, rather than potentially missing the mark or even feeling uncomfortable for them.
That's a really practical takeaway. Okay, let's move on. Continuity. Now, this isn't just about things staying exactly the same, is it? Because in a dynamic classroom or just in life, things are always changing.
You're absolutely right. It's much more nuanced than just simple stability or lack of change. The continuity motive refers to the fundamental need to feel a sense of connection between one's past, present, and future identities. It's considered a really fundamental facet of identity. The famous psychoanalyst Erik Erikson even defined identity itself partly as a subjective sense of an invigorating sameness and continuity.
Invigorating sameness. Interesting phrase.
Isn't it? And from a purely pragmatic standpoint, continuity is highly adaptive. If people weren't perceived by themselves and others as somehow connected to their past and future selves, how could they be held accountable for past actions? How could they form meaningful future goals? Society would kind of break down. So a coherent sense of continuity is vital for both individual functioning and social coordination. It's how we navigate a constantly changing world without feeling like we're losing ourselves entirely.
But like I said, our lives are constantly changing. Children grow physically, they learn new things constantly, they change schools, they make new friends, lose old ones. How can we possibly feel continuous if everything seems to be in flux?
That's the absolute crux of it. Continuity is not the absence of change or simply stability. It's about finding some conceptual thread connecting past, present, and future time slices of identity despite the occurrence of change.
Ah, a thread.
Exactly. We look for coherence in our life stories. We try to create a narrative arc that makes sense of where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. Empirical evidence strongly supports this. We perceive aspects of our identities that provide a greater sense of self-continuity as especially central and self-defining. We desire future selves that maintain this feeling of continuity, and we fear future selves that threaten to undermine it. And critically, a perceived lack of subjective continuity is associated with psychological distress, including negative feelings and even feelings of dissociation. It can feel like you're losing your grip on who you are.
That makes a lot of sense. It feels fragmenting if there's no thread. So how do people actually construct this sense of continuity when they're faced with all this inevitable change? Are there different strategies we use?
Yes, the source highlights two broad strategies people use: essentialist and narrativist.
Okay, essentialist and narrativist.
The essentialist approach is based on a belief in a stable, enduring core identity, some essential me. that remains fundamentally unchanged over time and across situations. From this perspective, continuity is maintained by sort of denying or trivializing the changes that occur. It's like saying, deep down, I'm still the same person I always was, or I'm fundamentally a math person, so this one bad grade doesn't really change anything essential about who I am.
Right, focusing on the unchanging core.
Exactly. In contrast, the narrativist approach works by establishing a coherent storyline, a narrative, to connect the different parts and phases of one's life. This approach allows even major changes, like moving to a new country, overcoming a significant illness, or experiencing a big academic struggle to be accommodated into a coherent life story. These changes become turning points, or are marked by social procedures like rites of passage, like graduation, that help integrate the change into the ongoing narrative. It allows for growth and evolution within a continuous story.
Ah, that's a really powerful distinction, especially for the classroom. An essentialist child might say, I've always been good at drawing, so of course I can do this art project. They're relying on what they see as an innate, unchanging talent. Whereas a narrativist child might be able to reflect on how they really struggled with math last year, but through sustained effort and maybe extra help, this year they really feel like they turned a corner, and now they actually enjoy it. They see it as part of their personal growth story, showing progress.
Okay.
And teachers can profoundly help students frame their learning journeys using that narrativist approach, right? By emphasizing effort, resilience, learning from mistakes, and growth over time, rather than just focusing on fixed abilities. That seems much more adaptive for learning.
Absolutely. It fosters what Carol Dweck calls a growth mindset. Furthermore, the importance of continuity isn't just personal. It extends to our group identities too, our sense of connection to our family, our school, our sports team. Perceiving continuity in these group identities, feeling that your school or your family has a consistent identity over time, predicts both stronger identification with the group and better individual well-being. And interestingly, people don't always use reasoned logical arguments to maintain this feeling of continuity. Sometimes it's just a feeling of being connected. Nostalgia, for instance, thinking fondly about the past, can be a really potent source of continuity maintenance, especially when that sense of connection feels insufficient or threatened in the present. It's why we love looking at old photos or cherishing familiar traditions.
So things like school traditions, telling stories about alumni achievements, or even just looking back at old class photos together could be really powerful ways to create that sense of continuity for students and the whole school community. It fosters that feeling of a shared history and identity.
Precisely. And culturally, while the need for continuity seems universal, how it's constructed definitely varies. For example, research suggests East Asians might show less consistency in their self-descriptions across different situations. They might act one way at school and quite differently at home. But this likely reflects a greater cultural emphasis on adapting to the context, rather than a lower need for feeling continuous across time. They might still feel perfectly continuous from their past self to their future self, even if their behavior changes with the situation.
Right.
Similarly, other research mentioned suggests European Canadians might tend to lean more on essentialist strategies, I am fundamentally this way, while Indigenous Canadians might favor more narrativist ones, my story connects my past and present, perhaps reflecting different cultural understandings of selfhood and history.
So again, it's not whether you want continuity, but how you construct it, the kind of story you tell yourself that differs across cultures. That's a vital nuance, especially when working with diverse students in a classroom. Okay, moving on to the next one, distinctiveness. This is the need to stand out, right? But it's not just about being unique for uniqueness' sake, is it? There's more to it.
You've hit on a critical point there. Yes, the distinctiveness motive pushes people to see themselves as distinguished in some way from others, but it's not just vanity, it's actually essential for basic meaning-making. Think about it. What does it truly mean to be a musician unless that identity somehow distinguishes you from non-musicians?
Right. The label only has meaning by contrast.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's not just about self-definition. It also has profound practical benefits for social coordination within groups. If everyone was exactly the same, society couldn't function. We need complementary roles, different skills, not just chaotic imitation. So this motive is seen as universal, perhaps not for purely biological reasons, but because humans are fundamentally meaning-making creatures and highly socially organized. Societies simply need ways to distinguish their members for roles, for responsibilities, even just to recognize each other.
Okay, that makes sense. So how does this distinctiveness motive actually manifest in our behavior? What signs might we see maybe in a child in the classroom?
Well, people consistently remember information better if it distinguishes them from others. They're also most likely to mention their more distinctive attributes when asked to describe themselves. I'm the only one in my class who... And these distinctive attributes are often considered especially central and self-defining. And when feelings of distinctiveness are threatened, for example, if everyone suddenly starts doing the same unique thing you thought was yours, or if you feel like you're just lost in the crowd, people tend to report more negative emotions. They might even try to distance themselves, physically or symbolically, from others to reestablish that unique space or identity.
I can totally see that in a classroom.
Yeah.
You often see it with a student who might excel at a really unique hobby, like maybe they're amazing at coding or they play an unusual instrument that nobody else in the class does. That becomes a really core part of their identity in the classroom, a way they feel special and distinctive. Or maybe a child who develops a really unique drawing style, and that becomes their thing.
Exactly. Those are perfect examples. And people don't just defend their individual distinctiveness, they also defend the distinctiveness of their group identities. This can manifest in positive ways, like celebrating their school's unique spirit or traditions, but unfortunately, it can also manifest in negative ways, like stereotyping other groups to emphasize how different we are, or even discriminating against members of their own group who deviate too much from the group norms, because those deviants threaten the group's distinct image.
Right.
Some theories, like optimal distinctiveness theory, even suggest there's a constant trade-off or balancing act between our need for distinctiveness, being unique, and our need for belonging, being included. They suggest a single underlying motive that can be satisfied in different ways, sometimes by standing out individually, sometimes by belonging to a group that stands out.
Okay. And culturally, is this drive for distinctiveness primarily a Western individualistic thing, often associated with, being your own person? Or is it truly universal across different societies?
That's a common assumption, that it's mainly Western. Historically, it has often been linked strongly to individualism. But the evidence reviewed in our source strongly suggests it's actually universal. However, and this is the crucial part again, how distinctiveness is constructed and valued varies significantly across cultures.
Okay, so different flavors of distinctiveness.
Exactly. In many Western cultures, distinctiveness is often understood primarily in terms of difference. That is, uniqueness in personal qualities like abilities, opinions, preferences, or physical appearance. I'm different because I think this, or I can do that.
Right.
It also often includes separateness, emphasizing distance from others, encompassing concepts like privacy, autonomy, independence, needing one's own space, both physically and psychologically. I need to be separate to be me.
Okay, difference and separateness.
But in many non-Western, more collectivist contexts, distinctiveness is more often emphasized and achieved through one's social position. Their specific, unique place within the complex web of social relationships, kinship ties, roles, or status hierarchy within a group. It's about fulfilling a distinct and valued role within the collective, rather than standing apart from it. I am unique because of my specific role and relationships in this family community.
That's a huge difference in emphasis.
It really is. The source refers to research by Vignol and colleagues that directly tested this. They found the distinctiveness motive was indeed strong in collectivist nations like India and Japan, just as strong as in the UK. But what predicted feelings of distinctiveness was different. In the collectivist nations, it was associated more strongly with having a clear social position, whereas in the UK, it was more strongly associated with feeling different and separate.
Wow. That is such a critical distinction, and one that could be easily missed if you're only looking through a Western lens. And again, so relevant for teachers. In a classroom, a child might feel distinctive by being the best at a particular academic subject difference, or maybe by having a unique, quiet corner where they can do their independent work, separateness. But another child might feel just as distinctive, maybe even more so, by being the really reliable group leader in collaborative activities, or the designated materials manager who keeps everything organized for their table. Social position. Their distinctiveness comes from their role within the group.
Exactly.
Recognizing these different pathways means teachers can foster feelings of distinctiveness in multiple culturally sensitive ways, rather than just focusing solely on individual achievement or standing out from the crowd. It's about helping each child find their unique, valued spot within the classroom community.
Beautifully put, yes.
Okay, next up, the meaning motive. The search for meaning seems so foundational, so deeply human. How does it fit specifically into identity, and what does this research tell us about its unique role?
You're right, it feels incredibly fundamental. The meaning motive refers to that profound need to find significance or purpose in one's existence. Many, many theorists across different fields portray it as an essential feature of human nature and a core component of psychological well-being.
Yeah, it feels like something we all grapple with.
We do. And meaning-making has immense adaptive benefits. It allows our actions, even mundane ones, to take on significance beyond their immediate context. It transforms rote tasks into purposeful endeavors. Finding meaning is absolutely crucial for coping effectively with trauma, with unpredictability, and for avoiding the deep anxiety or hopelessness that can arise from feeling like life is random or pointless. It also powerfully leads people to identify strongly with groups that provide clear meaning and purpose for their members. Think about religious groups, political movements, even some social clubs. Uncertainty identity theory, for example, suggests this is especially true in times of personal or societal uncertainty, when we crave clear answers and a sense of direction.
So it helps us make sense of the world and our place within it, especially when things feel chaotic or tough. It's like our internal compass for purpose, keeping us oriented.
Exactly. And the empirical evidence backs this up. A perceived presence of meaning in one's life is strongly and consistently associated with psychological well-being. And interestingly, when people's sense of meaning is experimentally undermined, for example, by pointing out inconsistencies in their lives or challenging their core beliefs, they tend to seek to reaffirm meaning, often quite intensely, sometimes even in completely unrelated areas of their lives. It's like the system needs to restore balance.
Wow, like a meaning thermostat?
Kind of. Some theorists even argue that meaning logically precedes self-esteem, that you actually need a meaningful framework or value system first in order to evaluate yourself positively or negatively within it. While the meaning motive clearly has a strong and pervasive influence on how we define our identities, the research suggests it doesn't fully subsume the influence of the other motives we've discussed. It has its own unique, powerful role to play.
Okay. And are there cultural differences in how this meaning motive plays out, or perhaps in what gives life meaning in different societies?
That's a really interesting question. While the need for meaning is likely universal, cultures certainly construct different kinds of meaning, emphasizing different values or life paths. For instance, the source mentions one cross-cultural study comparing the U.S. and Japan. It found that while the presence of meaning was linked to happiness similarly in both countries, American participants reported feeling less happy if they were actively searching for meaning, whereas this negative link wasn't found among the Japanese participants.
Huh. Why might that be?
Well, the researchers speculated it could reflect a greater cultural focus on self-improvement and the process or journey in Japan, where the act of searching for meaning might itself be seen as valuable or normal, rather than a sign that something is wrong, as it might be perceived in the U.S. context. It also seems plausible, though maybe less directly tested, that the meaning motive might be more acutely aroused or feel more urgent in societies with looser social structures, where individuals are more expected to find their own unique meanings and paths in life, compared to societies with more rigid social norms and clear, predefined roles that might provide a ready-made sense of purpose.
That makes sense. And again, bringing it back to education, this is so relevant. Helping students find meaning in their learning can be such a powerful antidote to boredom and disengagement, can't it?
Absolutely transformative.
Instead of just saying, you need to memorize these historical facts for the test, a teacher could ask, why is this historical event still significant today? How does it connect to our lives or to the issues we see in the world? Or with math, how could this skill help you achieve your future goals or maybe solve a real-world problem in our community? Connecting learning to that bigger picture, to real-world impact and purpose, can activate that deep meaning motive. It can potentially transform students from passive recipients of information into active seekers of knowledge that matters to them.
Beautifully said. That's the goal, isn't it?
Okay, now let's shift gears slightly. The next two motives, efficacy and belonging, are described as being more about identity enactment, about doing things and interacting with the world. Let's start with efficacy. This sounds a lot like competence, right? What's the specific drive here?
It absolutely does overlap heavily with competence.
Yep.
The efficacy motive is defined as the push for feelings of competence and control. The idea here is that having a sense of self isn't just about being an object of awareness, something that simply exists, but also about being a subject or an actor who is capable of influencing their environment, of making things happen.
Right, the feeling that you can do things.
Precisely. Now, there are obvious adaptive benefits to actually being competent and in control, of course, but crucially, the research highlights immense psychological benefits to simply seeing oneself this way, even if that belief is sometimes a little optimistic.
Ah, the power of belief again?
Yes, exactly. This is where Albert Bandura's incredibly influential self-efficacy theory comes in. It proposes that our beliefs about our own capability to produce a desired outcome, our self-efficacy beliefs, can actually enhance our actual performance. People with higher self-efficacy beliefs tend to set higher goals for themselves, they try harder, and they persist longer despite setbacks and failures. In short, and this is a really powerful nugget from the research, it suggests it's often psychologically better to be an optimist than a realist when it comes to your own perceived capabilities. Believing you can do it often significantly helps you to actually do it.
So the belief itself genuinely helps you achieve. That's a powerful idea, almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy of competence.
It can function very much like that. And this starts early. Experiences of successfully influencing one's surroundings, even a baby learning they can grasp a toy and bring it closer, are considered an early and important precursor of the sense of self in infancy. That's efficacy developing right there.
Wow.
And throughout life, feelings of competence and control are consistently strong predictors of psychological well-being, life satisfaction, and even feeling secure in relationships. Conversely, a perceived lack of efficacy is strongly linked to depression, anxiety, and feelings of helplessness.
Right.
People even instinctively create what psychologists call illusions of competence and control. We tend to overestimate our control over random events or unrealistically underestimate the time it will take us to accomplish complex goals. These optimistic biases seem to serve a motivational function, helping us keep striving and feeling capable. And research consistently shows that people have a heightened desire for competence when their current feelings of competence are low or have been undermined, which reinforces the idea that this is a fundamental adaptive motive.
In the classroom setting, this is just incredibly clear, isn't it? A student believing they can master a difficult new skill, even after some initial failures, is demonstrating that core efficacy belief.
Exactly.
And teachers foster this constantly, right? By breaking down large, daunting tasks into smaller, more manageable steps. By celebrating effort and progress along the way, not just the final perfect result. And by providing lots of opportunities for students to experience success, even small successes, which gradually builds that crucial belief in their own capability. It's all about creating that upward spiral of confidence and competence.
Yes, that scaffolding, that focus on effort, and that positive reinforcement are absolutely key to building efficacy. Now, culturally, while the benefits of feeling competent seem to be universal, the forms of competence that are most salient, most valued, or most commonly pursued can vary.
Okay, so competence looks different in different places.
It can, yes. Hazel Marcus and Shinobu Kitayama, two prominent cultural psychologists, distinguish between what they call disjoint and conjoint forms of agency. Now, these terms sound a bit academic, but the idea is quite simple.
Okay, break it down.
Disjoint agency, which is more prevalent in typically individualistic cultures like the U.S., sees agency the power to act as located primarily within the individual. It's about my individual power, my unique skills, my ability to influence things independently.
Right, the rugged individual.
Kind of, yeah. Conjoint agency, on the other hand, which is thought to be more prevalent in many collectivist cultures, sees agency as arising more from the combined, coordinated efforts of multiple individuals working together. It's about our collective power, how we achieve things through collaboration, interdependence, and fulfilling our roles within the group.
Ah, okay. Individual power versus group power.
Exactly.
Okay.
They illustrate this by comparing, for example, American versus Japanese media portrayals of athletic performance, often focusing on the individual star player's heroics in the U.S. versus emphasizing team synergy, coordination, and collective effort in Japan.
That's a great illustration. So think about a group project in a classroom. Efficacy might be felt strongly by a child who takes the lead, does a fantastic individual part, and is seen by everyone as individually competent. That's disjoint agency. But it could also be felt just as powerfully by a child who feels competent because their team successfully collaborated to achieve a shared goal, knowing they played their specific part reliably and contributed to the collective success. That's conjoint agency.
Precisely.
So a teacher recognizing and valuing both kinds of competence, the individual brilliance and the effective collaboration, can create a far more inclusive and motivating environment for all students, acknowledging these different cultural models of getting things done.
Wonderfully put. Yes, that's the practical application.
Okay, finally, the sixth motive, belonging. This feels like such a core human need, almost primal, doesn't it? How does it function specifically as an identity motive, and what are maybe some of the surprising ways it plays out.
You're absolutely right. It does feel primal. The belonging motive refers to that fundamental need to maintain or enhance feelings of closeness to others, or social acceptance, both in interpersonal relationships and within groups. Roy Baumeister and Mark Leary, in a very influential paper, identified the need to belong as a fundamental human motivation, truly foundational to our psychology.
Yeah, it feels essential.
It likely is. Its evolutionary benefits are pretty obvious. Humans are intensely social creatures, and we're poorly adapted for solitary survival. We exist in a state of what anthropologists call obligatory interdependence. We literally need each other to survive and thrive. So this motive plays an essential and highly adaptive role. And the flip side is powerful too. When people experience social exclusion or rejection, they typically show a strong, sometimes almost desperate desire for social reconnection.
And what if direct social contact isn't immediately available, or if someone is feeling really left out? How do people try to satisfy this powerful need indirectly, or maybe try to reconnect?
People employ all sorts of ingenious, sometimes surprising indirect strategies when direct connection isn't working or available. Feelings of loneliness or rejection can lead to things like increased sensitivity to social cues, trying harder to read people. It can lead to heightened memory for social events. It can increase identification with larger, more inclusive groups, even if those groups are quite abstract, like identifying more strongly with my country or fans of this sports team. It can even lead to self-stereotyping, acting more like the typical member of a group you want to belong to, in hopes of fitting in better. Some fascinating research even suggests people might use things like watching familiar TV shows, almost like a form of social surrogate, seeking company from fictional characters when real connection is lacking.
Wow, using TV for company. That's quite something. But you can absolutely see this playing out with a new student trying desperately to fit in at school. They might unconsciously mimic the way other kids talk or dress, or they might try really hard to join the biggest, most established friend groups, seeking safety in numbers.
Exactly.
Or conversely, a child who feels consistently left out might withdraw completely. Or sometimes they might act out, maybe disruptively, simply to gain any attention and feel seen, even if it's negative attention. Because even negative attention is still a form of connection, a sign that they exist in the social world. It really can be a cry for belonging.
That's a perfect classroom example, capturing both seeking and reacting strategies. The need for belonging is also very closely linked to self-esteem, particularly through what Mark Leary called sociometer theory.
Sociometer, like a social meter.
Exactly. Think of it like this. Your self-esteem isn't just about how great you feel about yourself in a vacuum. It functions more like a built-in social gauge, a psychological monitor that constantly checks your relational value, basically how much it thinks others value and accept you.
Oh, okay.
According to this theory, a dip in your self-esteem acts like an alarm bell, signaling a potential risk of rejection or exclusion. This motivates you to then behave in ways that might make you more acceptable to others, to restore that relational value. So while the feeling of belonging, or lack thereof, is often experienced psychologically in terms of changes in self-esteem, the underlying drive, the research suggests, is a distinct motive for connection itself.
Okay, that makes sense. Self-esteem is the gauge, belonging is the fuel it's measuring.
That's a nice way to think about it.
So earlier we talked about distinctiveness wanting to be unique. Now we have belonging, wanting to fit in. How do we resolve that apparent tension? They sound like they could be in direct conflict much of the time.
They absolutely are often portrayed as conflicting, yes. Theories like Brewer's optimal distinctiveness theory explicitly propose that we seek a delicate balance between satisfying our need for distinctiveness, feeling unique, and our need for assimilation or inclusion, feeling similar and connected. Too much of one threatens the other.
Right, the balancing act.
However, the source argues that when these two motives are conceptualized more fully, considering the cultural variations we discussed, the conflict isn't always inevitable, or at least it can be resolved in interesting ways.
Oh, how so?
Well, remember how distinctiveness can be achieved through social position in some cultures? That form of distinctiveness actually relies on being embedded within a network of relationships. You are unique because of your specific recognized role within the group. So belonging enables that kind of distinctiveness.
Ah, right. They're not opposed there.
Exactly. Also, feeling accepted and valued by others, belonging, can actually make one feel that their differences are recognized and appreciated, rather than being seen as a barrier to inclusion. Think of a group that celebrates its members' diverse talents. And finally, certain kinds of group memberships can often satisfy both motives simultaneously. For example, belonging to a highly unique or elite club, a niche interest group, or maybe a specialized academic program within a larger school. You get the belonging from being in the group and the distinctiveness from the group's unique identity.
That's a great point. You can be unique within a group or belong to a unique group. That's a much more nuanced understanding than just seeing it as a simple tug of war between standing out from a group versus fitting in with it.
Precisely. And culturally, while the need to belong is universally present, it's definitely not just a collectivist need. It's strong even in highly individualistic cultures. The forms of relationships and the meaning of groups can vary. Some research suggests the belonging motive might even be more easily aroused or threatened in individualistic nations, precisely because relationships might feel less stable or obligatory compared to more interdependent societies.
Interesting possibility.
Again, the basis for group belonging can differ. Western groups are often formed based on similarity among members within social categories. We join groups of people who seem like us based on shared interests, beliefs, or demographics. Whereas groups in some other cultural contexts, like Japan, might be based more on interconnections within functional social networks, like a workplace or a neighborhood. Or diverse individuals with different roles are bound together by mutual obligation and interdependence. It's less about being the same, more about fitting together.
Right. So, bringing it back to the classroom one last time for this motive. Building a classroom community where every single child feels accepted for who they are, fostering both their unique individual contributions and a strong sense of collective identity seems absolutely key.
It is.
This could involve things like cooperative learning structures, having regular circle time for sharing perspectives, explicitly celebrating the diverse backgrounds and unique strengths of each student. It's about ensuring both their belonging and their distinctiveness needs can be met, ideally in complementary ways. Creating that feeling of being a valued, unique part of a supportive whole, like a mosaic, not just a uniform block.
It's a beautiful image. Yes, exactly that. Okay, so while the theory and evidence for each of these 6 motives looked at individually is pretty compelling, a key strength of Vignol's work, as highlighted in our source material, is really trying to look at the effects of more than one motive in combination.
Right, how they interact.
Exactly. Until relatively recently, surprisingly few studies actually did this systematically. Yet it's absolutely crucial if we want to understand if they each make a unique contribution to our identity dynamics, or if maybe some of them can be reduced to others, like maybe distinctiveness is just a form of self-esteem seeking. We need to see the whole symphony, not just listen to the individual instruments playing solo.
That makes sense. So this is fascinating. It suggests these aren't just separate items on a checklist. They actually push and pull against each other, driving our choices in ways that can sometimes seem counterintuitive or even contradictory. Do we have any good experimental evidence showing these motives conflicting or interacting in surprising ways?
We absolutely do. There's some classic studies that really highlight this tension. For example, in a well-known study by William Swan and colleagues back in 1987, they looked at self-esteem versus self-consistency, which relates to our continuity motive. They found that participants generally felt happiest when they received positive feedback, regardless of their pre-existing self-views that supports the basic self-enhancement motive, the feel-good drive.
Okay, makes sense.
However, their cognitive reactions to the feedback were different. They found the feedback more trustworthy and accurate if it confirmed their prior self-views, even if that feedback was negative.
Whoa. So they felt better with positive feedback, but they believed the feedback more if it matched what they already thought, even if that was negative.
Precisely. It suggests participants were, on some level, willing to sacrifice a temporary gain in positive feeling, self-esteem, for the sake of maintaining that sense of self-continuity, that consistent view of who they are.
That is complex. Feeling good versus feeling right about yourself.
It is. And similarly, Marilyn Brewer and her colleagues in 1993 showed that people might, perhaps surprisingly, sacrifice potential self-esteem boosts to protect their sense of distinctiveness. In their studies, when participants' feeling of distinctiveness was undermined, for instance, if they were told that everyone else was pretty much just like them on some positive trait, they actually reduced their identification with a group that was otherwise positively valued, but no longer felt distinctive.
So they chose to feel less connected to a good group if belonging to it meant losing their unique edge. They prioritized being different over feeling good by association.
That's what the results suggested, yes. So it's clearly not just about maximizing positive feelings. It's also powerfully about feeling consistent and feeling distinct, even if that sometimes means accepting less positive information or distancing from positive groups. Our psychological system seems to have multiple masters it's trying to serve, and sometimes those masters have conflicting demands.
That's complex, but it feels more realistic, doesn't it? Life involves trade-offs.
It does. And to study this interplay more systematically, Vignole and her colleagues developed a really interesting approach. They measure how these different motives affect two key identity processes we touched on earlier. Identity definition, which is about how we internally perceive different aspects of our identity, like roles, traits, group memberships, as being central or important to who we are, and identity enactment, which is about how we present or express those aspects of our identity to others.
Okay, definition is the internal view, enactment is the external presentation.
Exactly. And the core assumption driving their method is that identity aspects that successfully satisfy our key motives tend to be perceived as central and important definition, and are more likely to be emphasized or shown to others, enactment. Conversely, identity aspects that frustrate our motives tend to be marginalized, seen as less important or hidden from view.
Okay, so by seeing which motives predict centrality and expression, you can infer the relative importance of those motives.
That's the logic, yes. And what do they find? Well, looking at identity definition, what people rate as most central or self-defining, the studies consistently show that four motives uniquely and substantially predict this: self-esteem, continuity, distinctiveness, and meaning. All four make independent contributions.
All four. Wow.
Yes, and this finding has been replicated robustly across 19 different nations and across different levels of individual traits, relational roles like being a parent or friend, and group memberships, and even across different domains like identifying with possessions or places.
So those four, self-esteem, continuity, distinctiveness, meaning, are like the core pillars of what we think defines us.
They seem to be the primary drivers of how we structure our internal sense of self, yes. Now, belonging and efficacy also play a role in identity definition, but their impact often appears to be indirect, perhaps happening through their contribution to self-esteem, or maybe by fostering the conditions necessary for self-definition to occur. They're important, but maybe less directly structural for the internal definition.
Okay, that's really clear. So if you want to know what someone truly thinks defines them internally, look at how their sense of self-esteem, continuity, distinctiveness, and meaning are being met by those aspects of their life.
That seems to be what the research points to.
But then what about identity enactment? How we actually show ourselves to others? Do the same motives drive that public performance of self?
This is where the motivational predictors shift somewhat. For identity enactment, what people report showing to others or emphasizing about themselves, the motives that especially predict this are self-esteem and belonging.
Ah, so self-esteem and belonging for the external show.
Primarily, yes. Efficacy also emerges as a significant predictor, though perhaps less consistently across all studies. It makes intuitive sense, right? We want to present ourselves in ways that make us feel good, self-esteem, and that help us connect with and be accepted by others, belonging. We also want to show we're competent, efficacy.
Yeah, that does make sense. We manage our public image to meet those needs.
And there's also this fascinating bidirectional relationship noted between identity definition and enactment. What we consistently show to others can, over time, become more central to how we define ourselves internally. And conversely, what we internally define as core to ourselves is more likely to be shown or enacted externally. It's a reinforcing loop between the inner self and the outer presentation.
Okay, so it's not a strict one-way street. Inner and outer selves influence each other.
Exactly.
And how do these motives influence our emotions more broadly, like our overall happiness or our deepest hopes and fears for who we might become in the future?
This is where the emotional impact really comes into sharp focus. The research shows that people generally report being happiest with those aspects of their identities, and even with their material possessions that successfully satisfy three key motives: self-esteem, efficacy, and meaning.
Okay, happiness links to self-esteem, efficacy, meaning.
Interesting. And when you ask people about their future identities, their hopes and fears, a similar pattern emerges, but with continuity joining the mix. People strongly desire future selves that promise feelings of self-esteem, efficacy, meaning, and continuity. And conversely, they actively fear future selves that would frustrate these same four motives.
So continuity becomes really important when we think about the future, about who we want to be and stay being.
It seems so, yes.
Yeah.
That thread connecting past, present, and future feels crucial for our desired selves. And again, in these studies looking at happiness and future selves, belonging often shows its effects indirectly, often mediated through self-esteem, highlighting again just how much our feeling of social acceptance feeds into our overall self-worth and emotional well-being.
Okay, so pulling this all together, it sounds like each of these six motives plays a crucial, maybe specialized role, but some seem more focused on our internal self-concept, the mental architecture of who we are, while others are more about how we act and present ourselves out in the world. Is that a fair summary?
That is an excellent synthesis, yes. The pattern of results strongly suggests that continuity, distinctiveness, and meaning are primarily relevant to identity definition, how we internally construct and define ourselves, what we consider our essential self. You could almost think of them as the technical criteria for forming a coherent self, continuity, distinctiveness, alongside that subjective search for purpose, meaning. Right, the internal blueprint and purpose. Yes. In contrast, belonging and efficacy seem primarily relevant to identity enactment, how we act in the world and present ourselves within it. Efficacy is about our capacity to act on the world and shape our experiences, and belonging is about finding and maintaining our place within the social world.
Acting and connecting.
Precisely. And then there's self-esteem. It consistently proves relevant, often strongly relevant, to both identity definition and identity enactment processes. It seems to be this pervasive foundational motive that constantly checks in on both our internal sense of self-worth and how effectively our external presentation is maintaining that worth and our social standing. It bridges the inner and outer worlds.
That's a really elegant way to pull it all together. Okay, so we have these six motives. They interact. Some focus inward, some outward. Self-esteem is kind of everywhere. Hashtag tag V. Individual differences in motive strength and applications. Now, if we're often unaware of these motives consciously, as we discussed way back at the beginning, how on earth do researchers even measure how strong these motives are in different people? It seems really
huge difference. So Vignole and her team cleverly tackled this challenge by developing a more implicit method for measuring motive strength. Remember how we found that, on average, people generally perceive aspects of their identities that provide, say, a sense of self-esteem as being more central and self-defining. This consistent pattern across people suggests the presence of a general self-esteem motive operating.
Okay, yeah.
Vignoles' ingenious implicit method basically takes this logic down to the individual level. It calculates the statistical correlation for each individual participant between their ratings of how much each of their identity aspects satisfies a particular motive, like continuity, and their ratings of how central or important that identity aspect is to them, identity definition, or how much they express it, identity enactment.
Whoa, okay. So you look at the pattern within one person across all their different identity bits.
Exactly. A stronger positive correlation for a specific motive, let's say, between feeling distinctive and feeling self-defining across various roles and traits for person A suggests a stronger underlying implicit motive for distinctiveness for that particular individual. It's like their personal identity system is more strongly tuned or organized around satisfying that specific need, even if they couldn't tell you that consciously.
That is really clever. It's not what you say about your motives, but what your actual patterns of identifying yourself and behaving subtly reveal about what drives you. So what have these implicit measures shown so far? Do they actually predict anything useful in the real world?
Well, the research using these implicit measures is still relatively new, but the initial findings are really promising and support the validity of the approach. First, they confirmed that these implicit measures are indeed generally unrelated to people's explicit self-reported beliefs about their own identity motives, which suggests they really are tapping into something different, something likely less conscious.
Okay, so they're measuring something unique.
Yes. But crucially, these implicit motive strength measures do predict various real-world attitudes and behaviors. For instance, one study found that people with a stronger implicit continuity motive were less willing to consider undergoing cosmetic surgery, which makes sense, as surgery can disrupt one's sense of physical and self-narrative continuity.
Ah, interesting link.
Another study found that a stronger implicit belonging motive was linked to more socially desirable responding on questionnaires, wanting to present oneself favorably, and also to greater in-group favoritism, biased preference for one's own group. Both behaviors that arguably serve the goal of fitting in and maintaining positive group standing. And perhaps most tellingly, another study found that people showed a stronger implicit belonging motive after being experimentally induced to recall experiences of being ostracized or excluded. This fits perfectly with the idea that frustrating a motive leads to intensified strivings to satisfy it. The implicit measure picked up on that heightened, compensatory drive for belonging. So while it's still an emerging area, this research into implicit motive measures offers an incredibly important avenue for understanding these powerful, often unconscious drivers of our identity behavior.
This sounds incredibly useful, not just for researchers, but potentially for understanding complex human behavior more broadly. What are the potential applications of having such an integrated model of these six motives? Where could this understanding be used, out there in the real world?
Well, beyond the clear theoretical gain of having a single integrated framework that can potentially explain identity dynamics across diverse domains, from personal traits to group memberships to consumer choices, there are significant potential practical benefits, especially when it comes to designing more effective interventions.
Interventions, like therapy or public health campaigns.
Both, and more. Having this comprehensive understanding provides a much richer theoretical toolkit for analyzing real-world identity-related challenges and for designing interventions that target the specific motives that might be most relevant in a given situation. The source gives a couple of really compelling examples.
Okay, let's hear them.
One involves understanding national identity and attitudes toward immigration. Historically, numerous studies have linked what's called an essentialist concept of nationhood, where national identity is seen as based primarily on fixed traits like ethnicity or ancestry to higher levels of prejudice against immigrants.
Right, that link is well known.
But the underlying motivational basis for this prejudice was often unclear. It wasn't always just simple dislike or fear. It felt like something deeper was being threatened.
So it wasn't just straightforward xenophobia. There was maybe a deeper psychological drive being triggered.
Precisely. So Naidu, Pearson, and Vignoles hypothesized that this link might be better explained by the continuity motive. The idea is that large-scale immigration can be perceived by some as undermining the historical continuity of their national identity, especially if that identity is defined primarily by ancestry, by an unchanging past.
Disrupting the national story.
Exactly. And their study of British adults supported this. They found that among people who had a weaker implicit identity motive for self-continuity, the link between believing nationhood is based on ancestry, essentialism, and prejudice against immigrants basically disappeared. This strongly suggests that the continuity motive, when it feels threatened by perceived changes to a historically defined national identity, contributes significantly to prejudice in those for whom continuity is a strong driver. Understanding this specific motive allowed for a far more nuanced explanation than simply focusing on threats to self-esteem or distinctiveness.
That's a really powerful illustration of how digging into these specific motives can illuminate complex social issues and potentially point to more effective ways to address them, maybe by finding ways to affirm continuity differently.
Potentially, yes. It opens up new avenues.
Yeah.
Are there other intervention examples in the source? Yes, there's another great example. An intervention study by May and Vignoles from 2010 that aimed to enhance intentions to donate blood among young people, which is often a challenge.
Okay.
Based on their research into the motivational basis of desired future identities, remember we found self-esteem, efficacy, meaning, and continuity were key there.
Yeah.
They created an information leaflet. This leaflet deliberately portrayed the identity of a blood donor as someone who would likely experience enhanced feelings of self-esteem, efficacy, continuity, connecting to a tradition of helping, and meaning, making a real difference.
So they tried to appeal to multiple motives, not just do good, feel good.
Exactly. And they found that this multi-motive leaflet successfully increased immediate blood donation intentions compared to a control condition. But here's the really crucial part. When they statistically analyzed why it worked, the effect was significantly accounted for by changes in participants' beliefs about the potential feelings of continuity and meaning they could derive from donating blood.
Wow. So it wasn't just about making people feel good about themselves, self-esteem. It was more about making blood donation fit into their life story, continuity, and giving their actions a deeper sense of purpose, meaning that's an incredible level of insight for designing impactful campaigns.
Isn't it? It beautifully demonstrates that taking into account the influence of multiple identity motives beyond just self-esteem can significantly enhance the effectiveness of interventions aimed at changing identity-relevant behaviors.
Yeah, clearly.
And the broader implications for this kind of integrated motivational model are just vast. You can see it applying to health promotion, like encouraging exercise or healthy eating by framing it in terms of efficacy and meaning, understanding family processes, like how roles satisfy belonging or distinctiveness needs, consumer behavior, how brands appeal to our identity motives, fostering civic participation, and maybe even understanding the powerful motivations behind complex, high-stakes behaviors like political extremism or terrorism, where identity threats and motives are often central. In each of these areas, this framework helps us look beneath the surface behavior to illuminate what kinds of identity categories people are seeking, what kinds of experiences threaten their sense of self, and what actions they might take to maintain a satisfactory sense of identity, driven by these fundamental motives.
And for you, our listener, thinking specifically about education, this applies so directly and powerfully, doesn't it? Think about it. Understanding which specific identity motives might be most strongly at play for different students in your classroom, for example. Is this student primarily seeking belonging right now, while that one is desperately seeking distinctiveness? Is this child struggling to find personal meaning in a particular subject? Recognizing these underlying drivers can profoundly help educators tailor their teaching approaches, create more genuinely inclusive classroom environments where different needs can be met, and foster positive self-concepts in truly impactful ways. It shifts the focus from just addressing a surface behavior, stop disrupting, to trying to understand the underlying psychological need. What is this behavior telling me about their unmet identity needs, which feels absolutely fundamental to truly helping a child learn and thrive.
It's about seeing the whole child, isn't it? Their motivational world included. #tag outro. So just to recap our deep dive today into Vivian Vignol's fascinating work on identity motives. We've uncovered compelling theoretical arguments and empirical evidence for at least 6 potentially universal identity motives. These are the fundamental drives for self-esteem, continuity, distinctiveness, meaning, efficacy, and belonging.
The big 6.
The big 6. And while these motives themselves seem to be deeply human and likely universal, it's absolutely crucial to remember that how they are expressed, prioritized, and satisfied can vary dramatically across different cultural contexts, leading to all the rich diversity we see in human identity, but reflecting equally valid paths to achieving a satisfactory sense of self.
Yeah, and the core idea here feels really profound. People don't just operate on a single track, like only seeking self-esteem. There's this whole multiplicity of powerful, often unconscious motives constantly interacting and shaping how we construct, maintain, and sometimes defend our identities throughout our lives. Understanding this richer, more complex tapestry of drives helps us better predict, understand, and ultimately maybe more positively influence identity-related outcomes both in ourselves and in the people around us, especially the children we work with. So what does this all mean for you, our listener, especially thinking through that lens of your background in elementary education? If we now understand, or at least have a framework for understanding, that every child walking into our classroom is driven by this complex set of powerful, often unconscious identity motives, how might that change the way we teach? How might it change the way we interact, the way we structure activity, the way we build a truly supportive and thriving learning community?
Maybe consider this as a final thought. If a child is struggling academically or maybe acting out socially, could it be at its root a cry for distinctiveness, a need to be seen as unique? Could it be a deep, unmet need to belong and feel accepted? Or perhaps a frustrating search for personal meaning in what they're being asked to learn? Could it be more than just a deficit in skill or a simple behavioral problem? How can recognizing these hidden drivers help us to look beneath the surface behavior, to try and connect with the underlying psychological needs that are shaping that child's entire development, not just their academic progress? It's almost like trying to become a motive whisperer in the classroom.
A motive whisperer. I love that. Think about how becoming more attuned to these deeper psychological needs, the ones shaping your students' identities from the inside out, could potentially transform how you connect with them, how you interpret their struggles, and ultimately how you help them truly thrive, not just academically, but as whole people.
We really encourage you to reflect on maybe your own identity motives, which ones feel strongest for you. Observe how these might play out in your own daily life, and definitely consider how they might be manifesting in the children you encounter every day.
It's a fascinating ongoing journey of understanding, isn't it? And it really promises to unlock deeper connections and maybe even more effective ways to support growth. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.